I want to welcome all of you to this webinar on energy healing and higher states of consciousness. This has been a long time in the making, and it came up because there's a possibility I might give this PowerPoint show in France. And so after working on it for 3 days and hauling up all kinds of old studies, it finally dawned on me that I could use it here. And if I don't in France, at least it will get an introduction through you guys. And I hope that you find it absolutely fascinating and enlightening. It is a PowerPoint show, so I will share my screen with you. So this is called Energy Healing and Higher States of Consciousness. It actually begins with the premise. And the premise, I don't know if you will agree with it or not, everything is made of light. That transformations in consciousness basically are increases of the light within and around us. I really like Edgar Cayce's definition of light. He says, light is that from which all things come. Life in its manifestations is vibration, and the vibratory force determines as to what its nature is. Now, I'll unpack that a little bit because Edgar Cayce could be speaking in very high language that was difficult to understand. What he's basically saying is that the vibratory force actually determines who, what, and how we are, what our nature is, what the nature of everything is. And he says that the source of that is given by the cell itself, from which it produces, as is seen in all matter. Science proved the truth of this statement through a French scientist named Fritz Albert Popp, who started out doing some research on cancer and discovered that all cells emit light. And the bottom line for what he wrote and was actually drummed out of his professorship for, on account of this very radical notion, but which has since been proved independently, is that we absorb subatomic photons of light, which are packets of energy, the smallest packets of energy in the cell. We absorb it from sunlight, food, air, and water, and then we radiate it in a prismatic biophotonic field of energy, which some of us know of as the aura. And in this, you can see that this is the DNA RNA shape that is the center of the cell and the nucleus of the cell. And what Edgar Cayce said, and what Popp also said, is that blockages in the absorption or flow of energy create illness and disease. Now, this doesn't just mean blockages in terms of the energy, vibrational energy of the body. These blockages can happen on the mental, emotional level as well, and cause drop-offs of cellular energy in the body. And then conversely, the open flow of coherent light equals vibrational health. The outcome is waves of light that are coupled and resonating in coherence. And that's what you see here in this slide, is that that this person's biophotonic field has no blocks, it's open, there's a flow, but it can, of course, look very different. And we see people who are suffering from coherent or incoherent or chaotic energy fields all the time. And in fact, you can feel them, can't you? So I've broadened the view a little bit here to look at this. This is my theory, but I've recently seen it in Joe Dispenza's most recent book, Becoming Supernormal. I thought I was out on a limb here with this, but apparently it's being picked up, this idea, this holistic idea of how everything interacts on the cosmic level, as well as what you just saw in the center of the cell, the microcosmic level, begins with the idea of the electromagnetic wave spectrum of light. Here you see very slow waves that are radio, TV waves, that they speed up in frequency toward infrared, and then divert into a very small sliver of this wave spectrum into our visible light spectrum. You see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet. The movement from red to violet being a speeding up of the frequencies. And then ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays, and then not shown on here are cosmic rays. So what this is basically saying is that the human brain, mind, and body process life within the visible light spectrum. Everything we see, hear, sense, feel, taste, and touch through our senses and that processor, the brain, is occurring within the visible light spectrum, but not necessarily confined to it. That spectrum is just a sliver of what's available, and even though we're operating in this very narrow band, within us is the ability to expand into any bandwidth simply by consciously attuning to it, like the radio sets we are, to optimize, heal, transform, and evolve ourselves and others. I put this in because I think it's very interesting. I had this question in workshops before. People say, but wait a minute, shouldn't the red that's in the mind mirror be at the, since it's at the bottom of the wave spectrum, why is it here at the top? Well, because if you think about, first of all, the chakra system, which starts at the bottom, at the base, and then moves upward into higher frequencies, if you quiet this thinking mind and you move down into the frequencies of nature, and then the frequencies in theta of your essential being, and then the frequencies that are so low and slow at the top of the electromagnetic wave spectrum, but for us and the brain at the bottom, well, this is our entryway, our portal into higher frequencies on the spectrum, higher states and levels of consciousness. Most of you are familiar with this Mind Mirror 6, and indeed probably have experienced that the awakened mind pattern and mastery of this beta is the way that we go into lower frequencies and access higher states of consciousness. Most of you also probably know that our work with the Mind Mirror begins with English biophysicist, clinical psychologist, Zen master, hypnotherapist, and Mind Mirror inventor C. Maxwell Cade. Here you see Max in a very old picture. This is actually Anna Wise here at the bottom right. She's meditating with a group of people. This is a very old Mind Mirror 1 or 2. They're also using ESRs that are our present day GSR. And this would measure psychophysiology in terms of placement on the palm to measure arousal or relaxation. So they used both body in the ESR and mind measurements in this picture, which is probably from the 1980s. And then I selected this quote from Max because it's really the basis of what we do and the basis of all healing. And he wrote, from our studies on the brainwave patterns of some 3,000 pupils, as well as swamis, yogis, Zen masters, healers, mediums, and clairvoyants, it has become possible to establish that all of the unusual abilities that some people are able to manifest, including the self-control of pain and healing, healing of others, telepathy, etc., are associated with changes in the EEG pattern toward a more bilaterally symmetrical and integrated form. And indeed, you're going to see that that is the basis, that is the condition in which healing takes place. It's also the basis of all movements into higher states of consciousness. We've seen this again and again in people's brainwave patterns, and they've reported it, and you'll see it in this PowerPoint show as well. Max Cade did an enormous number of studies on healers. He worked with Rose Gladden, Major Bruce McManaway, and many other of England's famous healers, as well as healers who came from other countries, such as swamis and yogis. And in the many studies, wherein usually he had one mind mirror on the healer and one on the recipient, he found some things that were common, always common. One is that infallibly a transfer of the fifth state, which is the awakened mind, from the healer to the recipient occurs. In other words, the healer is in that state of consciousness when they're healing, and that the recipient can be in any state of consciousness, but that pattern does transfer. Said that the patient's EEG readings showed a slow but fairly marked increase in amplitude, while the healer's patterns showed a corresponding decrease. In other words, the healer was actually giving energy to the recipient. Both of them returned to their normal amplitudes within 5 to 10 minutes after the session. So this is an occurrence. This happens within a period of time, and it is the source of the healing, is this transfer of energy. Another factor is that bilateral symmetry, as we've already said, is the criteria of healing, as in all higher states of consciousness. Hemispheric symmetry of brain function seems to be central, said Max, to health control in general. It harmonizes the nervous system and allows the body to heal itself. He found in some studies that the healer would be in a state 5 awakened mind pattern, and the recipient's pattern would not change. So he suggested move to the head and see what happens, and then the recipient would move into an awakened mind pattern and the healing could begin. And so his conclusion is that the location of the hands can change brainwave patterns and physiological readings, that hand location alters brain rhythm and the level of arousal. And that level of arousal he was talking about on the ESR. And then he said that delta in the waking state represents a reaching out to the not yet known. It is often found in healers, especially when they are altering their intention to the patient or trying to match the needs of the patient. Delta is connected to the paranormal. Now, in subsequent years, and many studies later, not only by Max, but by many others, what we now know is that it's not just the paranormal. Or it depends on how you define the paranormal, right? Something that is beyond us in our sliver of the wave spectrum, that's at a higher frequency. Well, what's there? Could be spirit guides, could be out-of-body experiences, as we've found with the TMI studies, remote viewing, healing. Anytime you connect in your very low and slow delta waves with the field itself, the quieter you are, the better your connection with the field. So delta is very, very involved in healing. And then he also observed Jung's transcendent function, as he interpreted it, and that was the ability to use two halves of the cortex appropriately and independently of each other. So that even though you had this bilateral symmetry in the brainwave pattern, if the healer needed to send energy with more amplitude on one side than the other, they could do that. But then they would return to the fifth state when charging the batteries. So now, Max Cade's successor, Anna Wise, measured the brainwaves of healers working with Feldenkrais, triggering, although I'm not sure what that is, polarity therapy, hypnosis, and Qigong masters. But she did not pursue it as so much of a vocation as Max did. She taught classes involving the self-control of energy, and she believed that before you would heal others, you needed to master the state 5 yourself, which I'm sure Max completely agreed with, since that was what you were transferring. And then she wrote in her book, The High Performance Mind, that she preferred that students feel the flow of energy within their own bodies, work with self-healing, and practice manipulating and directing energy within themselves. And so in some of her classes that were dedicated to energy and energy healing, students took turns practicing the laying on of hands and noticing sensations in their bodies, giving their hands free rein to find a particular place that needed healing, and remaining in that place until a gut-level feeling said the healing was done. I expect that any of you who have done energy healing or had the benefit of energy healing by someone else, whether that was through Reiki or any of the many other modalities, or no modality at all, simply a laying on of hands, would agree that that is the general way it's done. You just know. This is working on completely an intuitional level. And when it's done, typically the recipient knows that as well. So just to recap this, most people start out in this ordinary mind with their brainwave pattern where they have a splayed beta, no alpha, no theta, and the delta is active because, again, that's our connection with the field, but it's also our radar that we use to sense what's going on around us and beyond us in a way that is not logical or intellectual. This pattern is a bit problematic for most people because if it were to be like this all the time, it would basically mean that people are cut off from that alpha bridge, which you see over here in this pattern, the alpha theta meditation state. When that alpha is present, consciousness is relaxed and diffused, and the person has a sensory bridge to their theta. The repository of the subconscious mind and long-term memories, and therefore their personal insights, their creativity, and their spiritual connection, because theta, again, is the location of the essential being. So the definition of meditation is actually the absence of beta with the presence of a combined alpha and theta, the alpha giving you the bridge to the material of the mind in theta. If you are able, either in meditation or with your eyes open, to externalize this alpha theta meditation state, then you would see the presence of beta. So beta, low beta, not this busy beta here, but this quiet beta, allows us to actually withdraw from the outside environment and turn inward to become more aware of our inner reality. So this, you can see, has very low frequencies and the highest, low amplitude and the highest frequencies. And this mind is really turned into itself, and that's what characterizes that open flow of awareness that allows us to have peak moments of insight, the aha experience. But this is also the state 5 pattern that Max Cade observed as being the conduit of healing. It's also the pattern of the psychic, as well as the peak performer, pattern of creative flow. Most people never attain more than this pattern, but some do. Some find themselves in the wonderful situation of being able to have this alpha, theta, beta, and delta amplified in this circle of the evolved mind, which is a state of unity consciousness, bliss, higher awareness, surrendering and merging with this field in which one could say, and I would, and you probably would agree, is a quantum sea of light that arises out of, is governed by, and exists in love. It is responsible for the healing and growth on this planet, and no doubt all other planets and dimensions of awareness. And when we connect with that force, there is typically a spontaneous inflow of higher insights and a feeling of bliss, the sense that nothing matters other than just being in this oneness, in this joy, and in this peace. Now, in Max and Anna's time, these were the only patterns that were known, because the mind mirror had certain frequency limitations. And indeed, when I began this work in 2005, studying with Anna Wise, this was the mind mirror 3 pattern that we had. It had the wonderful ability to monitor brain waves exactly as we do now on the Mind Mirror 6. But you can see that the topmost band was 38, which meant that the topmost frequencies were 44. Now, we didn't know it at the time, or no one mentioned it, but actually anything above 30, which would include our top two bands, are gamma. So I was very interested in this while I was doing even my independent study work, because I kept saying to Anna, you know what, I'm having people report to me that they are in their meditations moving into awareness of the other side and talking with a dead husband and healing all kinds of issues. And this is the pattern. And that pattern has got a beta, has got an awakened mind below it, but something else is happening up here. And Anna said, well, that's just energetics. And that was true. But it was also gamma. And at 2005, that's when all the gamma studies began to come out, associating gamma with high frequencies from 30 to 100 hertz, that when they appeared in Tibetan monks, Franciscan and Carmelite nuns, and other people in the laboratory were causing a whole brain synchrony that knit together through synchronous waveform action, as we saw in that picture of the woman, just that kind of coherence, all four lobes of the brain across all frequencies. And at the same time formed new brain cells in the frontal lobes, affording more intelligence, greater intelligence, the capacity for greater intelligence anyway, and also additional brain cells, new brain cells, in the hippocampus, which is the memory storage and retrieval center of the brain. So that meant that people who were accessing gamma were actually becoming smarter and more creative because they had more brain power, more high voltage brain power. And this actually is high voltage brain power. It also meant through neuroplasticity that their circuitry would wire better and faster. They would make changes mentally, emotionally. They would make changes in the nervous system faster. And indeed today, there are quite a few people who are exploring using gamma to cure PTSD and other nervous system issues. Now in this slide, I didn't know any of that. I would learn all that through mostly mind and life studies and the work of Wolf Singer and Richard Davidson, and also Andrew Newberg, who was studying gamma. He didn't know it was gamma until Richard Davidson told him. He actually just found that the parietal lobes would lose their function in the radionics. That's maybe not the right word. He was a radiation therapist. He would take them in the lab and inject them with dye and find out that the parietal lobes stopped functioning, and people would experience this unity consciousness. And then Richard Davidson began to measure some of his subjects and found out that they were really accessing gamma. So at the time I didn't know all this yet, but I knew there was something going on in these high frequencies. Over the course of one weekend, I managed to hook up, entirely by coincidence, 3 separate people who were producing brainwave patterns exactly like this. One was Rose C. She's an NDE survivor and psychic. She traveled out of her body during an inner temple meditation, and she was initiated by thousands of angels. And, you know, I was pretty skeptical of angels and such subjects at the time. And I said, well, so that's interesting. And maybe in the back of my mind was thinking, well, maybe this was just artifact. Maybe she moved and I didn't see her. And she says, well, it was a wonderful experience, and she was just glowing and everything. And she says, but I don't know why I really came here to have these brainwave sessions. She was in my meditation group. I'd met her I'd been teaching an intuition development course at a community college and had met her there. And so she was coming to the meditations, and never in years, literally 5 years, had she been interested in brainwaves, but she just felt driven somehow. Suddenly she had to have this session, right? She says, I still don't know why I'm here, why I came here. And she meant here today, right now. So I said, well, why don't you go back and ask the angels? And she did. And there was the same pattern again. It was not SEMG artifact. It was maybe she was out of body. We've certainly seen these patterns on people who were moving out of the body. But what you see is what I gradually came to name the superconscious mind and gamma synchrony. The other person I saw those brainwaves in the same weekend was UK spiritual healer Malcolm Smith. And this is just a lovely, lovely man who had no belief in anything like this until some poltergeists began to destroy his house, knocking pictures off the walls, misplacing things. And finally, his family was so terrified that he found the Society for Psychical Research and went to them and said, what is going on in my house? He said, oh, somebody wants you to activate your healing abilities. Well, he had a grandmother who was a healer. And he said, I'll do anything. And so he began to heal people. And it turned out, as you can see by this blast of light, that he is an extraordinarily powerful healer. He travels to the U.S. through the ARE, Edgar Cayce's ARE, who books him up in New York City and other parts of the country. I mapped him the first time and did a story on him, and the stories were just utterly amazing. People he had worked on in New York City right before 9/11 said that they were having pictures of the towers collapsing, and or they were spontaneously healed of, cancer and just amazing things. So I went back a couple of years later and said, I need to look at this guy again, but this time I want to hook myself up. And so I put a mind mirror on him and attached a mind mirror 3 to myself. And it was just an impossible situation because Malcolm was transmitting these incredibly powerful golden streams of light into my body. And I was leaned back, had my head tipped back, and I was in so much bliss that I was having a computer problem so that it wasn't recording into my computer, and I had to look down at the face of the Mind Mirror 3 to see my patterns, but I couldn't make myself move because I was literally in heaven. And I kept saying, you have to look down, you have to look down, look down, look down. And so finally my smart ego forced me to look down, and this was my pattern. This was his pattern, which was recorded, and that was my pattern. And so here we are looking at every single one of Max Cade's conditions for healers: bilateral symmetry, a transmission of energy, and most of all, I felt it. So then I was really even more interested in healers and healing. This is another healer I mapped while I was writing my Psychic Soul book. I went to a conference on psychic phenomenon. She was teaching, Linda Schiller-Hanna, a truly lovely woman. And while she was doing the reading, the psychic reading, there's that gamma again. So here we come back to our question of what is paranormal? Is it psychic perception? Is it OBE, RV? Is it healing? Well, it seems to be all of those. As you can see, here she's producing this exact same pattern. The top 2 bands, and here she's meditating quietly. Her speaking pattern, I thought, oh, maybe that's got some SEMG, so I asked her to just be very still and meditate. There it is again. Again, the gamma and those high voltage, high frequency energies are involved in what she's doing. So then I had the lovely opportunity in 2011, actually the same year, to map a man named Franz Steiner. Franz is the founder of the International House of Reiki that's based in Australia. He has had Shaktipat sort of transmission of energy in India that gave him these lovely benevolent eyes, and started this house of Reiki. And he's taught many, many people all over the world how to administer Reiki. And this is his pattern on the left, where he is almost in a yoga nidra delta only pattern. I mean, his brainwave amplitudes are so incredibly low, but you do see one little band of alpha here that gives him that awakened mind pattern. But even up here, when he has that still at that super low amplitude, you can see that something's going on with his higher frequencies. So I thought, am I looking at an awakened, teeny tiny, low amplitude, awakened mind below gamma again? I thought, well, maybe so, because look at his subject. Gamma up here, and she'd had no gamma before that, and an awakened mind below it. So what this says here is that Franz Steiner heals within a low amplitude, no mind pattern. That's how he called that low amplitude pattern, alternating with the high gamma pattern shown at right in the brainwaves of subject Deborah Harrigan, who herself was a psychic empath. Now, I called this a mind walk because in the study, which is up on the Institute for the Awakened Mind website, what you see is that he gets this pattern, she gets this pattern, and then it goes back and forth. They are literally trading brainwave patterns, and it's quite extraordinary to watch it. You know that it's his gamma to start with because she didn't have any gamma, but he is giving her the gamma, and then she gives it back to him. It's quite amazing. And I saw the same thing happen in one of Franz's students, who was my friend. She's passed away now, Paula Michael Johnson. She lived here in Pennsylvania, and this is her down in this picture, Paula, and two people, Aaron Fisk, who's actually as recently as last year became a mind mirror practitioner trainee, and Jorgen working on a woman named Mary. And so I had at that time the Mind Mirror 4, which was produced by Thought Technology, and was able to monitor them all at the same time. And we saw the same thing, that there is a brainwave coupling, that there is a mind walking that happens, a resonance within the field that is created by the healing, a phase coupling, and that they mind link and share the awakened and evolved mind patterns with this blissed out subject. Now, I don't have a slide on it, but it's worth telling you here that in my Psychic Soul book, I talk about a study that I did with the Mind Mirror 3 and had 6 people, Reiki healers, hooked up at a time, working on one subject. Now, Max Cade had said in his book that if you have one healer working on a subject and another healer comes and stands behind them, and another healer, that the recipient's brainwaves continue to power up each time. Well, I only had 6 healers working on one person, but I can tell you that they blew into the most beautiful awakened mind patterns, even though none of them had that pattern with eyes open to begin with. As soon as they began to work on the recipient, they all moved into an awakened mind pattern. And toward the end of it, that study, one of them started developing these high-frequency gamma waves. And I said, oh, now this is going to get interesting. What are we going to see now? And one of them, well, they started to develop these diamond patterns of the higher self. Their awakened mind patterns actually started to move into these diamonds. And the diamond is just that. It would be an evolved mind bottom, a circular bottom, except that it's a diamond. It would be an evolved mind top, circular top, except that it's a diamond, right? And it meets an alpha. So I thought, this is interesting about the diamonds suddenly showing up, but it was close to the end of the healing, so I didn't say anything about it. And then in came 6 different healers. And after hooking them up, I was astonished to see that they opened not with the awakened mind pattern, but with the diamond pattern. And where the first group had talked about sharing psychic insights of birds, someone said, oh, I saw a bird, and oh, I thought about being at the beach and there were these birds. And so they were, there was some enough resonance in the field of the first group where they were talking about psychic things, and some people saw blue, some people saw purple. Those things would be associated with the awakened mind because the blue and purple are associated with delta. But the second group that came in that started with the diamond patterns, there was enough energy left in that field from the first group that they started with diamonds and started producing gamma and were expanding into evolved mind patterns. And afterward, they reported seeing the delta colors of white and violet, and some of them even reported what some call the gamma colors of gold. And in this case, they were not talking about insights that were shared between them as in the first group. Instead, they were talking about, I saw these guides, and these 3 guides were sending energy to us, and they were so they were talking about really high consciousness, truly paranormal events in the second group. So it became very clear to me at that point that this resonant field, it was a fact, and that it is a factor in healing, because these people, just like the ones in New York, began to share the exact same brainwave pattern. So then along comes the Mind Mirror 6 in 2011, the year I was working on my book. I was working on developing the Mind Mirror 6 with Steve Clark. And this was a complete game changer, because now not only can we record into a computer and look at the entire session frame by frame. We could do that on the Mind Mirror 3, but that's all we could do. If we were watching the pattern on the Mind Mirror 3 at 10 microvolts, that's how it recorded, and you couldn't see anything else. So if you failed to increase the attenuation or the amplitude readings on here, then you were just out of luck. So many things were added. First thing I did was add 2 bars of gamma, and now you see why. And then when Steve Clark and Nigel Walker developed the 100 hertz sensors, well, then they added, they developed, there was a potential to have more. So Steve kept saying, well, how do I split these up? And I said, well, just put 3 bands in there, because more than that, and it's not going to look like the Mind Mirror pattern anymore. So what we're now looking at is the original awakened mind pattern that goes up to 38 hertz right here. And that involves 2 bands of gamma, 35 to 45 hertz. The gamma synchrony pattern, which involves the 49 and the 59 hertz band, which we call mid gamma, and that consists of 45 to 65 hertz. And then what we're calling upper gamma, which is 65, some of this band here. I have a squirrely mouse here. Here we go. 65 on up to 100 hertz, and comprises the 69, 79, and 91 hertz bands. So still, most people are looking at the awakened mind. There's the shape of the pattern. The evolved mind. I mean, most people still have out of control beta, right? So self-trainers are, first of all, still training the awakened mind pattern. And some self-trainers are working with the evolved mind pattern as well, trying to move into those bliss states. Those who are advanced meditators, however, are working on training the gamma synchrony pattern as it goes up to here, not in the higher frequencies. This gamma synchrony pattern, once we had the Mind Mirror 6, I was able to see that indeed the patterns I drew in my Psychic Soul book, which show this top 2 or 3 bands, as you saw in those Mind Mirror 3 pictures, like this, way, way out over an evolved mind, way extended over an evolved mind pattern. That is correct, but only in people who have untrained gamma. That when gamma is trained, as it should be for them to not have electrical issues, that gamma is going to integrate with the beta. So the difference between this awakened mind pattern and this gamma synchrony pattern is that there's more amplitude. But as you can see, otherwise it's pretty much the same pattern. The only other difference between the awakened mind and gamma synchrony, besides these higher frequencies and higher amplitudes and these higher frequencies, is less theta. And that's because people who are producing this pattern, and I saw it in quite a few people before we drew in and started inviting people to train the gamma synchrony pattern, is that because their concentration of consciousness is in the higher frequencies up here, there's less amplitude in theta, and that is just a given. That seems always to be the case. Well, not always. I have seen a few people who had so much theta that they surpassed the amplitude shown here in the white outline. But then once we had this, as you're going to see, now we have 100 hertz awakened mind, evolved mind, and gamma synchrony statistics, and things get really interesting because of the data analysis that we can do, not just with the mind mirror summary plot, which is going to tell us when a person hit, in this case, the gamma synchrony pattern. In time, you can click on this and it will say something like 12:22. So then you can go back into your mind mirror recording frame by frame and see what happened. So that's really important. The training statistics are extremely important because for self-trainers, it's going to tell them where they want to do their training, which should be above 70%, no matter what pattern. This person would be training the gamma synchrony at 66%. They would be training at training level 5. They would be training the meditation pattern at training level, because you've got 79% here, so they'd be training at 5. The evolved mind, they can only train at 5 because this is too high at 90, and they would be training, they could train the awakened mind at training level 4 because you've got a high 83%. But that's not the only use for research of the training summary. What we know now, after having had this mind mirror 6 for since 2012, so 6 years, is that psychics, healers, very advanced meditators, mediums, people who have a very high state of consciousness are registering between 75 and 98% at training level 5. So that has become our yardstick for our studies with the Monroe Institute and any other research that we do. We're really looking at training level 5 to see how they measure up against other people, right? So now with this, I can go back and study Franz Steiner again. So I did in April of 2015 in Washington, D.C., and he had a subject, Susan Andrews, who herself was a Reiki healer. There you see us in the hotel room. I was able, with these wonderful data analysis windows that we have, to be able to first look at his SEMG artifact and say, you know what? Because he was moving, maybe there was tension in his head as his hand was extended. I'm trying to be extremely conservative with this study, right? Maybe this is too close at 3.0, 4.0 SEMG. Maybe the tension in his head is creating artifacts. So what I did, as you'll see in the next slide, was I isolated this period here where there was extremely low SEMG readings, and that's what the study was based on. Of course, I always also looked at his gamma amplitude to find out when he turned on the gamma, and then used the mind mirror summary to see a summary pattern for the whole healing session of the recipient on the left and of Franz on the right. And you can see that he's got a lot more gamma than Susan does. So if you look at this segment that has very low SEMG, I mean, I was being ultra conservative, right? We can say that this gamma has got to be real. There was no way that this gamma is not real. Now, we're not quite as conservative anymore, because ultimately we know that gamma will show up in the SEMG window as movement or tension artifact, because movement and tension artifact and SEMG are occurring in the same frequencies, 75 to 100 hertz. So nowadays, what we really look for is sustained surges in gamma. This would be artifact right here, because this is a single data strike, right? But this is very sustained. Nevertheless, I based this whole study on the idea that this is what we can trust right here. But even here, you can see that their brain waves are tracking. Like, watch her increase in gamma in the left brain here, this increase in the right brain, and look at Franz's increase right here. We can put them side by side now, you see, and see the tracking. We don't have to rely entirely on the pattern side by side, although that's what's really the most fun. And so in this very low artifact segment, what you see at 1451 is Susan with a very strong evolved mind pattern at the bottom, or a flare at the bottom. Still basically an awakened mind, but with more gamma, low gamma, and way more high gamma, which is grayed out because I have the white light outline on, way more than she normally has. You'll see her average pattern in a moment, because Franz is transmitting that gamma to her. Look at, he's got an evolved mind flare, albeit up to 64 hertz in the left. He's got a lot of gamma here in the right, a lot of gamma in the left brain, very strong alpha, and also an upturned delta. And that's at 1451. He's still transmitting at 1512, a huge, almost perfect evolved mind pattern that, I don't want to say the word blows, but that's what happened. He amplified her into this huge awakened mind pattern. I've got the awakened mind on it, but if you've taken these into account, this is almost enough amplitude for a gamma synchrony pattern. And look how beautifully bilaterally symmetrical she is. Still has this evolved mind bottom at the bottom, so he does. 1522nd, he's still in this almost entirely evolved mind circularity, and then there she is moving into it. So look at the change in her patterns. She starts with basically an awakened mind during this segment. Of course, 15 minutes into the session, he's already transmitted a lot of gamma to her. But just look at those changes. Boom, boom, huge blast of alpha, relaxation, flow in her mind. Those brainwaves of the awakened mind, the brainwaves of healing, are flowing down in currents throughout her whole body the entire time. Because, of course, we're not looking just at the brain, as we saw earlier. We're looking on a cellular level at the DNA, RNA helix, at the photons of light, because this healing is happening photonically through the transmission of light. And so this top of this says, I have to move some screens along to see what it says. It's making changes. Yes, made a lot of changes. Okay, it says mind mirror summary and statistics for segment A. That's that low artifact, low SEMG, when Franz stands still and sends energy to Susan. Look at the beautiful pattern here. 90% awakened mind, evolved mind 20%. She's got low gamma synchrony because she doesn't have anywhere near the gamma he does. He has 55%, and you can see comparatively, this is her left brain, this is his left brain. He's got 55%. That is a gamma synchrony pattern. Huge gamma synchrony pattern. Nowadays, having done many more studies on non-local awareness and healers and psychics, mediums, we're actually seeing that anything above 30% in gamma synchrony is notable. 40%, we're looking really hard at that and realizing that this is their governing frequencies. These are their governing frequencies in high enough amplitudes for them to actually have effects on other people. This is a hugely large statistic on the evolved mind because of the circularity you see. But for gamma synchrony, we're actually now, especially at the Monroe Institute and in some healers, seeing 77, 80, 90 gamma synchrony patterns, which is truly extraordinary. And so this is another picture so we did opening and closing segments on them. So his eyes open. Amazingly, he has eyes open gamma, and an awakened mind is only 54%, but that's because he's got a lot of gamma at 38%. He's still got a high evolved mind because of this circularity. You see this big theta and big delta. He's one of these people. For a gamma synchrony pattern, he would only have to have this much theta, but he has a lot because this is, of course, his work. For her, with her eyes open, astonishingly enough, she had an awakened mind pattern to start with a 92%, she being a strong Reiki healer. But her gamma synchrony was pretty low compared to his, at 16%. At the close of the session, he has got a gamma synchrony pattern that's increased because of his healing of her, which aroused his gamma and transmitted to her. He goes from 38% to 52%. You can see the difference in the pattern. She moves gamma synchrony from 16 to 25%. That's a heck of an increase, right? You can hardly even see the change in her pattern, but statistically, the change is there. So now I want to show you a very exciting study that I just finished this week. It's a study on healer Fred Reibel and recipient Felice Dubois at the Monroe Institute just in March. That's not actually 2017, that should be 2018. It was just this March during a professional division seminar at the Monroe Institute. I was invited there to present some results on the Journey to Happiness study, where we monitored 16 people experiencing binaural beats through headphones and while they were hooked up to the mind mirror. If you haven't seen that, that's a really interesting study. I presented it as last month's webinar, and Oksana has it edited and it's up on the website right now. It's free of charge. It's also up on YouTube. So a little bit of background on Fred is that, well, let me just add here that, so what happened was that Felice was on ski poles. I had met her during the Journey to Happiness program, and she was walking with ski poles, and she looked like she was in a lot of pain, and I kept seeing her and thinking to myself, gee, we need to get some healers to work on her knee while she's here. But my original concept was, you know, several healers. And finally, I turned to Beth. By the third day, I was so busy, Beth Vaughn, who's with us today, and said, Beth, do we have a healer here or some healers that can work on Felice? And she said, well, Fred is a healer. So we set up a session, and I said, well, duh, why don't we hook him up to the mind mirror? So I hadn't met Fred before, and to introduce him now, maybe he's joined us by now. He formerly worked in the defense aerospace and then was in business for himself for 8 years, and then on active duty with the Navy, retired as a captain. And in 1974, he had knee surgery and experienced an out-of-body event, and subsequently learned about Bob Monroe's work, which sparked his interest in the esoteric and our powers beyond the physical. Now he is an outreach trainer for TMI, and a long-standing member of the board of directors. He is certified in Healing Touch as a practitioner with healingbeyondborders.org. which was formerly known as Healing Touch International. He works from home primarily by word of mouth. On Monday evenings, God bless him, he does volunteer healing touch therapy for medically fragile children who are permanent residents of the Helen Bernardi Center of Rady Children's Hospital. He's been doing that for 7 years. I told you a little bit about Felice, that she was walking around with the use of ski poles, and not her normal effervescent self. Felice is a beautiful woman who just exudes energy and goodwill and is always laughing. I hope she's on board with us today and can answer some questions. She's in France. It's 6 hours ahead of us time-wise, so we'll see. But her work was as a property manager, and so she willingly said, sure, let's hook up and do the healing. So what I'm going to do is take you through a series of screenshots showing Fred's brainwaves on the left and Felice's on the right, so you can see what happened over the course of this 18-minute healing. And I'm not going to show you that many, but enough that you'll be able to see that everything Max Cade said about healing and healers and how this energy is transmitted, absolutely true in this session, and we think in all sessions. So this is at 30 seconds when Beth was, thank you Beth again, taking very good notes of everything Fred did. He would say or she would observe. So we had a chronicle of timing, a timeline for this whole session. So he was accessing the energy field. He had started that 6 seconds earlier. I captured this because he flared into a 100 hertz left, that should say left brain gamma synchrony pattern. See it right here? This is actually noise because I forgot for the first 2 minutes to unplug the computer, this 59 hertz band. But you can see that it's a 100 hertz gamma synchrony because all of those are active up there. And then on the right, he's got a partially evolved mind pattern of unity consciousness. All he's doing is accessing the energy field. Now, Felice's pattern is low power, which was one of the things Max said, was that you would see low power patterns on people and not much organization. People who were ill would be producing low current, and that was also seen on the ESR physiologically. They would have low current and high skin resistance. So Felice, we didn't have her on the GSR. She was on the BVP meter. Next time I'll add the GSR. So here you see that, well, this is probably just noise from that 15 hertz that's pushing out that 19, but you can see that she's got some very quiet beta waves with some talking going on in the 15 hertz, 19 and 15 hertz band. She's pretty aroused. Her alpha peak is up at 12.5 hertz instead of the usual 10, which is the classic, and as people drop and go lower and slower into meditation, you can see that peak move to 9, but the arousal shows up here at a 10.5. Now, this may be partly because she too was accessing the energy field or possibly observing as Fred did so. But what's important about her pattern is that she, like Fred, has an evolved mind bottom. See this circularity? So that means that either she is connected with her unconscious mind and there's an upflow of information, or she's connected with the field and Fred as part of it, and there is an upflow of information and energy, most importantly, and energy. A few seconds later, 47 to 49 seconds, this lasted a while, Fred's upper gamma became hemispherically symmetrical. You can see below on the right here that there is what would be a gamma synchrony pattern, except that his amplitudes are so incredibly high, he just doesn't fit into the training summary because of these super high amplitudes. At this point, he's still accessing the energy field, and what you see in Felice is Still, she's got this 15 hertz beta band, but she is moving into some evolved mind circularity here on the right as she more deeply connects with the field. At 120 minutes, he's still in the this time he's attuning to the field. And what you see is all of his energy, as Max Cade said, that a healer can always choose to allow one dominant hemisphere. Doesn't always have to be done with hemispheric symmetry. And indeed, this is what you're going to see with Fred throughout, is that he has very dominant gamma in the right brain, possibly because of sensory healing. We don't know what it's about. If he's here with us, we'll ask him. But you can see that it's also pushing out his alpha here at 12.5 hertz. Now, Felice's pattern is starting to change at 1 minute and 20 seconds in. Now her alpha peak has dropped on the right to 10.5 hertz. She's still got some beta going on here at 15 hertz, and also still a high alpha peak in the left hemisphere, meaning that she's got basically an alpha split in the peaks. So there's still arousal taking place here. Things start to change, though, when he begins to work on her energy centers at 142 minutes. You can see the circularity here. Now he is balancing out his gamma here up the top. He's got a balanced alpha on both sides. He's got some delta active as well. And now we're looking at Fred not at 20 microvolts as we were before, but 30, because he's powered up. For Felice, I placed this gamma synchrony outline around her. We still have this artifact. Well, it's actually an electrical artifact band up here. It's going to disappear soon. But her pattern is becoming more symmetrical, and that 15 hertz beta is quieting down a little bit. She's moving toward a gamma synchrony pattern. At 4:14, by the time he's working on both of Felice's hips, well, look at his delta, 40 microvolts. So this is where Max was talking about the potential involvement of delta. 40 microvolts is a lot of delta. I had to move his attenuation out to 50 to be able to take it all in. Still a gamma synchrony pattern, but with a ton of extra delta. And his alpha peak has actually moved up to 15 hertz, possibly to meet hers. At the same time, her alpha is starting to stabilize in 12.5 and 10. They're starting to interact together. The 59 hertz noise is gone by now. You still see this upturned delta in her brainwave pattern. It looks like she's literally settling down. And indeed, what she said was that at a certain point, she began to meditate. Probably by this 5:03 minutes, this needs to be clarified with Felice. Here, Fred begins to work on Felice's stomach area, her abdomen, which includes her solar plexus, and that began at 4:36 minutes. So here at 5:03, he shifts to a 100 hertz evolved mind pattern in the right hemisphere. And Felice, who's now begun to meditate, reduces her 15 hertz beta and drops into a 10.5 alpha on both sides. Now, part of the reason that this occurred is because Felice's issue was in the solar plexus and the heart. And after the session, before either one of them saw brainwave patterns that I'd been drawing, they said that that's where the issue was. So Fred gets to the issue, Felice starts to meditate with him, and the brainwave pattern changes enormously. So here I have done a series of patterns where he's working on her stomach and abdomen and the chest area, working on her heart, and that's when things cleared. That's when she saw enormous enormous pattern changes. So here he is. Fred, pretty much you can see, maintains the same pattern the whole time. He's at 30 microvolts in each one of these to be able to bring in that huge right brain gamma. It's Felice's patterns that are undergoing enormous change. Here you see a gamma synchrony pattern, possibly an evolved mind. You'd have to actually put the outline on to see, but certainly bilaterally symmetrical, huge amplitude in her left brain for the alpha. Just a lovely pattern. It just looks pretty, doesn't it? You can even see that it's shaped so beautifully. Suddenly, he's still working on her stomach abdomen 10 seconds later, and she's going way down deep inside herself. So much so that her delta and her theta begin to merge here on the left. She's still got her alpha, but now we're looking at Felice not at 10 microvolts as we have been all along, but her pattern has doubled in amplitude. Now we're looking here at 20 microvolts. So you would see a lot more activity up here if we were looking at 10. This is still an awakened or a gamma synchrony pattern, but with all the healing taking place right there in her stomach abdomen. And that is where, as they both reported later on, the healing took place. Fred said he sensed it in her solar plexus, and she said that's where it is. It's an issue of grief. Down here, well, this is actually 1 minute before. Well, let me correct myself and just say 1 second before this pattern. Here she has this massive theta and delta, actually almost a channeling pattern with an evolved mind bottom. This is right where healing's taking place, isn't it, when it's grief? It's a mental emotional issue. This is where the block clears, in the solar plexus and in the heart. Over here, by 9:19, he's working on the chest area, and he has this massive delta increase, probably to about 25, almost 30 microvolts, and all of a sudden, Felice blasts into a 100 hertz gamma synchrony pattern. And you can see the outline around it. The pattern editor now allows us to be able to get training summary statistics for 100 hertz patterns, and that's what a 100 hertz pattern looks like. He's still working in the chest area. He maintains his pattern, although his pattern becomes a little bit more balanced, more of 100 hertz gamma synchrony pattern, but he's still doing the healing with this right hemisphere gamma, still with an upturned delta. Beautiful 64 hertz gamma synchrony pattern here for Felice with extra alpha on the right. Then he starts working on her head. Of course, the crown chakra is there, and she blasts back into this 100 hertz gamma synchrony pattern. And then at 10:51, he works on her face and crown, still sustaining his same pattern. And Felice amplifies to 12 microvolts and to 100 hertz. Now you could see this more 100 hertz activity happening here, literally in 100 hertz. And he's starting to work on our solar plexus more directly or again. And look at the delta. Amplified him out, attenuated him out again to 50, so you could see 45 probably hertz, almost 50 hertz of delta. And she meets it attenuated back up to here and here to 12 microvolts. So this is more power, you see, than her 10 that she began with. She's powering, literally powering up, and especially her delta in that frame. So I use the word mind walking in the earlier study with Franz Steiner because they began to pass that pattern back and forth, as in the Reiki healings as well. And that's what is happening here. Look at the similarities of their patterns. Now he's working on her left leg and left knee under the cover, He's so beautifully balanced for 100 hertz gamma synchrony. She's balanced, a lot less amplitude. And then here he's still working on it and really throwing that delta out again. You see her receiving the delta. And then, yes. And that continued virtually the rest of the session. They just started mind walking back and forth, the same 100 hertz gamma synchrony patterns, albeit Fred's had considerably more energy up at the top. So I captured just these two last frames for you. He moved back and started working off the body. At 1809, you can see his delta surging again in a 30 attenuation. She forms the left hemisphere evolved mind flare, representing her unity and spiritual connection with herself, Fred, and the field. And then at 819, Fred flares into a balanced high amplitude gamma. Felice's right hemisphere delta flares to 15 microvolts, possibly responding to his balanced release of energy. And then at the end of the session, he's balanced. Look at this massive 100 hertz gamma. You don't see those big flares, so his energy, either he was, well, perhaps he can tell us this if he's with us, his energy either is being amplified in the right brain because he's transmitting that way, or because he's receiving from the field in a sensory manner, possibly both. I think in these situations, both and is more the word than either and or. And then for Felice, you can see that she's got more gamma up here than she did to start with. Her beta is coming back in. She knows the session's ending, but look at this beautiful gamma synchrony pattern with this extra theta. So this is quite a shift in her brainwave pattern. But not just her brainwaves, because as we said, healing is occurring on a cellular level. Therefore, you should be able to see the changes in the body as well. Max Cade certainly did with the ESR, which now we have as the GSR. Next time we do studies on healers, we should use all of them. I only use the BVP meter to do her heart rate measurement. So just to be quick about this, you can see that there are some differences. The major difference here is that her stress index, which is a measurement related to peaks and the valleys, was 899, 684, 644, except here in this one segment. And during that one segment, that's where he was working on her face, her crown, off of her, let's see, her chest, her head, her face and crown, her crown off the body, her solar plexus left side, and then here he moved on to her knee. And I sent this to Steve Clark and said, so why would the data compress like this? And he had no idea, and I have no idea either. Perhaps some biofeedback specialist who's done studies with healers can tell us. But what it looks like is that her normal heartbeat literally not so much slowed down to fewer beats per minute, but more contracted. Excuse me. It's more that her heartbeat actually contracted, the peaks and the valleys decreased, and it narrowed. Why that would happen, maybe Felice can tell us, or someone else who has studied healers, but isn't that an interesting phenomenon? You see, this is such a vast difference, and it's right when he was working on where her issues, as she reported it, before she looked at any of these statistics, and he reported it before he looked at any statistics, and the statistics indeed confirm is where the healing occurred. So then I ran a mind mirror summary pattern and statistics for each of them. And what you see for Fred is the pattern you've seen all along. You saw him become bilaterally symmetrical many times during the session, and there were many more as well. But still, his right brain healing gamma is showing up as being the average, with the rest of the pattern being beautifully symmetrical. Fred, it's hard to measure him because even with the 100 hertz statistics, and you can see them here, using the pattern editor to get these 100 hertz statistics, he's still so far out of the range with this right hand gamma. So probably the gamma synchrony rewards of 24% for 100 hertz that he got here, they're far beyond the alpha. The alpha is fine with the theta and delta. These are beautifully proportional, but he's got so much gamma. So he's not really properly rewarded, but Felice was. In her training summary, you can see this big gamma that she received and sustained throughout that session. Up here in the 91, 79, 69, those were not there before. This little bit of artifact did show up in the session, but the rest of the pattern, gorgeously symmetrical. She won rewards for the 100 hertz awakened mind at 60%, evolved mind at 21%, and gamma synchrony for 76%. Those are extraordinary statistics indeed. What we have seen for gamma synchrony is a range of, as I said before, of anything 35 to on up, we take notice of. If it's up in the 76% for a lower frequency gamma synchrony pattern, extending only up to 64 hertz, we are really taking note. But she has got more than that for a 100 hertz pattern. So this really is some pioneering work for us, for people who are researching on healers or anything else, to start running statistics with the 100 hertz patterns that take into account these three upper bands. So I want to show you something that really startled me tremendously. And this is healer and medium Suzanne Temple, who lives in Rotterdam. She had a client named Mr. H. She did a whole webinar on Mr. H and some other people she had worked with, and she really opened for us the idea of working with people who had brain injuries and pathological conditions, because for us, the Mind Mirror has been all along about really working with people to advance consciousness. But of course, these are one and the same, aren't they? This is just one system. If you heal someone on a physical level, as you just saw with Fred and Felice, you're going to see an advance in consciousness, higher, in her case, more 100 hertz frequencies and more symmetry, more balance. And conversely, if you improve someone's brainwave patterns, you're going to heal them physiologically as well. Nevertheless, we had been very conservative about using the Mind Mirror for brain injury or physiological problems, simply because we started out being about meditation and consciousness, and we're really not licensed to work on people, but you can as a spiritual healer. And so I bring this up because this 49-year-old deep brain stroke client of hers who had a tumor in the brain stem was not operated on because it was too deep, but after a second stroke, doctors operated to remove the tumor. He was left with paralysis of the right eye muscle, disrupted hearing, left leg and arm motoric restraint, temperature difference in the left and the right side of his body, and balance problems. So he came to Suzanne and she said, "Well, I don't know if I can do anything for you, but I'm willing." You can find this program and meet Suzanne personally. It's under Case Studies Folio 4. It's really a wonderful program. So he said, okay, he would come, and she said, I will work with you for 8 sessions. So that's what she did. She used energy healing, but distant healing. She sat on the opposite side of the room from Mr. H and quietly sent energy to him while he self-trained on the mind mirror for 20 minutes at a time. His brain self-optimized while he was listening to audio cues for beta reduction, alpha symmetry, and the awakened mind. And then she would check his brainwave patterns on the mind mirror on each of 9 visits over a period of 8 months. So 9 visits, I misspoke earlier, over 8 months. His homework was to listen to binaural beat meditations produced by HemiSync, which is the Monroe Institute, and to visualize electrical impulses flowing from his brain into his left eye, ear, and body, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening. So now we're talking about distant healing and self-healing. After 2 months, as well as brainwave training, after 2 months, no more balance problems, he became more aware of his left side and began to use it. His reflexes improved, and that's after 2 months, so a few more sessions at the end of the 9 months. I might have that wrong. His reflexes improved, more use of the left side of his body. His throat, swallowing, and talking improved. Overall improvement in stamina, greater enjoyment of life. That's pretty extraordinary. Even more extraordinary are his brainwave patterns. This left side that he had no use of, look at it. Where's the alpha? And look at the asymmetry. He's a perfect example of why people need to have hemispheric symmetry after the 8 or 9 month period and the few sessions. He had so much improvement because he had hemispheric symmetry, which is pretty amazing. His statistics are low because Suzanne has tipped in force symmetry, which of course tremendously reduces your statistics because the awakened mind gives pattern rewards for only one side of the brain. But still, that he has a pattern this nice and probably lots more awakened mind flares at all is an almost miraculous recovery of this man. So I'll show you this too, because EFT, while being about another form of self-healing, does involve an energy transfer because you're open to healing, for one thing. So there's the potential for that bottom half of the evolved mind pattern. But also, you're focusing your awareness in a meditative state on making a change with having that intention to do so. So this is Dawson Church. He's a sort of EFT guru. I mapped some brainwaves for him and some people at the Omega Institute of upstate New York in 2017. A little bit about Dawson. He's a psychotherapist and integrative healthcare specialist, author of many books on healing trauma, a pioneer in the field of epigenetics, and an internationally known professional trainer in emotional freedom techniques. I chose for the person to analyze this woman, Agape Ermides, who is actually a medical doctor and anesthesiologist, because she was the person who had the lowest SEMG activity by far. Again, I was extremely careful with choosing the quietest period, the farthest under that 5 microvolts of disturbance borderline. And to just look at her, I just looked at her alpha and her theta and her mid-gamma here for different segments of the meditation. Here they were just waiting for it to start. There's an eyes open and an eyes closed at the beginning, and an eyes open and eyes closed at the end. And then she's tapping where I get stuck. And you can see that her theta is increasing because now she's accessing her issue. Now she's tapping in the same high amplitude theta find a symbol for what it looks like to be stuck. And so that's what she did. Then she tapped around her eyes, and then they did a round of EFT, which is about tapping on to break up really neurological blocks, particularly in the meridian system, tapping on the forehead or around the eyes, below the eye, on the upper lip, the chin, the chest, the flat of the hand, not the flat of the hand, the karate point, actually, that side of the hand. And so she did all of these different things, and you can see that her gamma is rising. Look at her gamma as she's self-healing. And not just spikes of gamma, but surges of gamma and sustained surges of gamma. And this is mid-gamma, 45 to 65 hertz. There's, it's remitting at times, but there are enough sustained surges to say quite easily that indeed she was having some gamma rewiring and gamma neurogenesis as well. So she said that she had no prior experience with EFT. She'd never done it before, that she'd only had traditional talk therapy since something had happened. I think it was a year, just over a year ago. A loved one told her something, and that insult had created ongoing triggers for an entire year, and it was a significant experience for her. So she said that after the tapping treatment was done, and they closed their eyes and focused on something positive, she began to feel super relaxed. She focused on a common image that she uses during meditation, and it elicited the deepest relaxation I've ever felt, she said. I felt like I was just an energy without my body, which you could certainly feel like in gamma. Since that meditation, I have been able to relax to that same level with the 2 meditations that I sent her by email. And then, so I did some follow-up with her and said, well, what has happened since then? She said, well, she had had a chance to receive some energy clearings of the integrated light kind. Not sure what that means, but I suppose it means, an energy healer. And she felt some physical effects during that healing. And then she's done an immense amount of work on her own since the summer before in the form of introspection, mindfulness, meditation, and meditative journaling using a technique that she learned through Rod Stryker's seminar in Pyra Yoga, but not on a regular basis. She said she's fairly new to meditation. It's been sporadic, but she feels herself much more drawn to meditation since being at Omega. So here I just want to show you. This is eyes opening, open to closing baseline. It doesn't look a lot different unless you look very closely and see that really the differences are here in the low and mid gamma range. So she had, astonishingly enough, with her eyes open, she had eyes open alpha and a beautiful pattern for the eyes open segment. She actually had a 79% awakened mind score, which is what you see usually as a more bottom measurement for people with their eyes closed for the awakened mind. So that was extremely impressive. She also had an upturned delta. Therefore, the software would say, this is moving toward an evolved mind. So that's a very high evolved mind score. And gamma synchrony, 43%, extremely high. So this is the beginning when she had her eyes open before anything else happened. The closing baseline for eyes open, well, she had decreased her awakened mind because she had so much more gamma here. Her gamma synchrony had moved from 43 to 81%, her evolved mind from 53 to 63%. So now we're really talking about self-healing, aren't we? This is not just an energy transmission, but as Anna said, you learn to heal yourself, then you become a much better healer. For her eyes closed, opening to closing baselines, she had a bit more alpha to start with, probably 16.5 microvolts, where this is about 16 maybe, but she has more 9 hertz alpha, joining that 10.5, meaning that she's deeper in consciousness. And that, even that little bit, you see, comparatively, can make a huge difference. Statistically, awakened mind from 66% to 88% with their eyes closed. Evolved mind from 3 to 9, gamma synchrony from 5 to 15. So those are really huge statistics. Now this pattern I wanted to show you because this is a Felice's pattern. I have permission from her to use it. That was taken during the Monroe Institute's Journey to Happiness program that I referred to before. This shows you that when you move into higher frequencies, which means higher frequencies on that electromagnetic wave spectrum, that extraordinary things happen, really no matter what the modality. Here at the Monroe Institute, it was moving into, as you can see, 100 hertz gamma synchrony through listening to a binaural beats meditation that had up to 80 and 100 hertz in it. And it was delivered through the SAM technology. And Felice wrote, or said after the meditation, "I loved the music in this meditation. Crystal clarity. I was dancing and could feel the movement of each finger and arm. I hit the perfection moment, and it was sustained. I may dance through life, doing this thing that brings me great joy. I may dance through life." And that being a repetition that has a world of meaning in it, simply because it says I'm free, doesn't it? As she was dancing in the meditation, she said her deceased ex-husband joined her, and they danced together in a life of perfection that actually hadn't existed. Our relationship reframed itself in a higher level of consciousness, and I grabbed the screenshot to show you much higher, how much higher it was. So this here is that gamma synchrony, but this is a gamma synchrony with an evolved mind top. See that circularity? So again, self-healing through higher frequencies. Then the only other screen capture that I pulled from that study, that Journey to Happiness study, is just to underline, again, how the higher frequencies, whether it's by spiritual healing from someone else, from yourself, or any other means, EFT, you name it, it really makes some serious changes in the brainwave pattern. This woman said, the first half of the meditation, I was not getting much visual. Then I saw a hydrangea in my yard. Well, she has plenty of alpha. She had the potential to see, but she wasn't seeing. But then between 31:03 minutes and 32:32 minutes, something happened, no doubt from the binaural beats, stimulated by that. And she says, then suddenly I saw a hydrangea in my yard. My arm was hurting. Then I somehow became my dog, a black lab. I was licking my sore arm as the dog. I was walking around the yard, experiencing life about 18 inches off the ground, yet I was very aware of my mind here. I experienced a soreness in my throat. I sensed everything through my dog. As the dog, I was lonely and wanting me to come home. So this made me fill him with love and joy and the knowledge that I would be home. At some point, after I calmed him, I transported into my body here. I don't remember transporting out, but I remember coming back. This is a retired family court judge. This is a credible person, right? So she blasts as the dog into this massive 100 hertz gamma synchrony pattern. She maintains that pattern. She moves from 17 microvolts to 20 microvolts, and then a few seconds later moves back down to 17, but more with an evolved mind flare here, and then 32 minutes back up to 20 microvolts with this huge integration down here. Really, you could almost call this the bottom half of a diamond. Massive. I mean, at 20 microvolts, as you saw with Fred, that's a lot of amplitude, considering that most people have 0.5, in these higher frequencies. All of this is to say that the human heart, mind, and spirit are infinite in their reach and ability to heal and evolve. That people heal in many different ways: silent meditation, EEG-led meditation, EFT, binaural beats, hands-on healing, communion with nature, NLP, shamanic journeying, you name it. Self-awareness and the desire and intention to heal always open the way. And I didn't say it because I do forget this a lot. The open and loving heart. Desire is implied, but heart is the driver of the intention. That's where the healing occurs. It's not just the brain. It's not just the consciousness. It's the heart that is in the consciousness that is a microcosm of that macrocosmic field, which is composed of love. That really is the driver of the healing. High-frequency gamma brainwaves are intimately involved with the healing process. As you've seen, gamma forms new brain cells, rewires neural circuitry, and heightens awareness of our potential to heal self and others. We become aware of ourselves as beloved and inseparable waves in this quantum sea of light. I think that you've also seen here that by learning to heal ourselves, by learning to access this gamma, to whether we're healing ourselves or others, but not just gamma, the patterns themselves, the awakened mind, the evolved mind, the gamma synchrony in lower frequencies, that our brains are rapidly evolving because all of those patterns contain gamma synchrony frequencies. Brains are rapidly evolving in the direction of spiritual intelligence. The mind mirror is an integral part of our collective transformation, now with data-driven research capabilities. And altogether, humankind is in the midst of a quantum leap in evolution. A wave is cresting on our planet, the understanding of our power and potential, and isn't it lovely to be alive on planet Earth today? I'll bet that every one of you would agree. I think we can unmute now and look for comments or questions. I see quite a few people have joined us, including Fred. Hello, Fred. Okay, so unmute and say hello. I was hoping that you would be able to come.
Hello, Judith.
People might have questions for you about that humongous right brain gamma you've got there. Your head is so wonderfully symmetrical. It's not about that. What is it about? Can I just be the first to ask you a question? Why do you think it's the right hemisphere? Is it sensory or is it what?
Good question. I don't know. I meditate regularly, and healing is all about being present for the client. This is the first time I've seen the brainwaves with healing, and so this is an education for me. Very interesting. I joined probably about 20 minutes after the hour, and it was interesting to see the other work that you've been doing with other healers and whatnot. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting to see what's going on with the brainwaves while we're doing what we're doing.
Righto. Righto. I wonder, could it have to do with feeling or emotion, which is associated with the right brain?
It could. I mean, I'm pretty much an empath. Is when I tune in to the person's energy field, just like when I was working with Felice. I was drawn right to that solar plexus area, and I could feel. And not so that I'm taking it on, but I could feel that pain. I could feel that had a good sense of it. Like I said, I'm not taking it on, but I have a good sense of what it is and what I need to do.
How do you keep from taking it on? Of course, every other people will have questions, but I think, this is a question that has come up on webinars before, and I've wanted it to come up, and I've wanted to ask that question of someone who knows the answer. How do you keep from taking it on? Because when I'm healing someone, boy, it goes in me and I feel their pain, and I just, get upset, and then I walk away, and sometimes I get the issue that was being healed.
I think it's all about being able to ground it, because you're getting well grounded and flow the energy. I mean, when I started doing the work, it took a little bit of effort, and now it's almost instantaneous. Just like when we were working with Felice, I set the intention to ground, and it's within easily, I'd say within 30 seconds.
That's great information.
And I feel like when I'm working with the energy, it's flowing through me, not out of me. And I feel just as fine after as I felt before. I don't feel drained. And I've worked, like when we work with the kids, we'll go one after the other. And it's just, I think I'd say, if anything, I feel more vitalized after and not drained.
What's the energy feel like as it's traveling through you? Are you aware enough of it to be able to articulate it?
It's not always the same, and I think it has to do with the client in terms of what's appropriate for what I'm doing. And I feel like my metabolism is increasing. I could feel a whole vibration through my body, lightness, the way sometimes I feel like whatever that force is around a person, I'll call it a light being, or maybe people might call it angels or a guardian angel. I feel the presence that they have for the person, the love, and I also feel the trust that they're entrusting me to go into the energy field and work. And sometimes I feel like they're working through me, and it's all vibration.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets so worked up I have to run to the bathroom, because like my metabolism increases and everything's just, I gotta go.
That's funny. That's funny.
I just wanted to comment on that BVP with the condensed picture. That we're looking at, you might want to talk to Roland McCready about this, but what they measure in the HRV, and they rarely talk about this, is what they call emotional quiescence, and that the frequency condenses around the higher frequency in the power spectrum, so that it looks sort of more condensed and very low amplitude, and it's often associated with what we think of somebody in an evolved mind state. More sense of oneness and peace and happiness and joy and bliss and all of these, very unusual as far as they're concerned. They don't see it all that often, but that might be related to it because this is a BVP rather than the heart rate variability. That's the way they measure it. But on their power spectrum, it would be kind of that condensed around the high frequency or parasympathetic end of their recording. So possibility.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. I know that there's something, I knew there was something there, and indeed that from her brainwaves is where we saw that she was moving up into those 100 hertz gamma synchrony patterns.
Yeah,
So,
I also wanted to share a screen here briefly, if I can do that, to show you something I think everybody would be interested in. What we're looking at here is the coherence in brainwaves, or in activity in the brain. This is an fMRI. They did several hundred men, several hundred women. On the left-hand side here, you're seeing the activity in the average male brain. And you can see that most of the coherence is in the hemispheres with very little, correspondence between the two hemispheres. They seem to act more independently of each other. On the right is the average female brain based on several hundred women. And you can see there is a tremendous amount of cross-talk between the two hemispheres in women. That might be, something that we'll want to think about in the future and maybe look at.
So are we better?
Yes, you're better connected than we are. But we knew that all along. Women are a whole lot smarter than men.
Oh, we wish.
I guess, Gary, it was so for a reason. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
The nurturers, we have the babies. We better have it connected.
Yeah, you better be better connected.
Any other questions for Fred or for anyone else?
Judith, while people are thinking, I have a few points that I noted. It was great presentation. And once again, you see that healers, they work on people who definitely experience some problems, but you see how through the body, through these problems, we actually are forced to work on our spiritual development. It always results in increased consciousness. So that's, in Russian, we always say that, every suffering comes to you for growth. So it's initiation. It's initiation for you. It's a test, and it's move on. It's like move on to the next stage. And another thing I pointed out that whenever you were talking about bends, you see how healing works. You can see like alpha joining theta. So this allows for the energy to flow. And I thought that this is kind of metaphor for communication in general. That's how people interact. That's how we, this resonance is critical, for us to be able to resonate and receive messages and interact with each other on another level. So healing is like non-verbal communication anyway, right, on the energy level. And you also can see that healer has to be louder in a way from the point of view of brainwaves, and healee has to be receptive. It's always a kind of smaller, and it's the brainwaves. I mean, the bands look smaller with smaller amplitudes, and it's for a reason. So it's important to be present. I really liked what our healer guest today said. It's so great. You have to be present, and I guess this presence means you are able to transmit. You are able to deliver, and probably to be heard as well. It helps the other person to tune. It sets this intention of channeling the energy. And again, this is also an example of why it is important to be in a group of people with such qualities. If you want, say, to develop certain quality, it's just the benefits of a group work, really. And that's why, it's great to be in a community where we can share and learn and really resonate with each other in awakened mind. So that's why I really love this work and invite everyone to stay with us.
Yes, and you remind me of something. So after the healing with Fred, she must not have been able to make it. Felice, you'll meet her in another webinar. Felice came bounding into the breakfast room the next morning without her ski poles, and was just back to her radiant self, just bubbling over, and so happy and excited. And she is now training to be a practitioner, a mind mirror practitioner, with me. And you might see her, Gary, in France next week, in Lyon, possibly. But she is very interested in studying the brainwaves of enough healers in a large enough group that we can do what Max Cade did back at the time he was writing his Awakened Mind book, and create a certificate of competence for healers as an income stream for Institute for the Awakened Mind, as a way of, well, how do you say it? You don't want to say getting rid of bogus healers, although that's basically what it does. But certainly people who would have this certification would have been tested on the mind mirror. We would, work and study to make sure that everything we've shown in the present webinar, which backs up everything Max Cade said in his book about wind healing works and how it works, that we could indeed issue such a certification. So that study, she's already got those studies underway, and she's going to be attending the ISSEM, ISSSEEM conference on healing at Unity Village in Missouri in September. And she has the means and the desire to create the certification, and it's extremely exciting. So that's the announcement. Now, I wonder, though, before we close, if we could send some healing energy to one of our dear practitioners, George Pearson. He presented a program on creativity for us, and do go back and see it. It was just an absolutely brilliant webinar. Back when we first started the webinars, and George was originally doing mind mirror practice. I think he was back there in the same period of time as Gary and Donna, studying with Anna way, way early, 2000, 2001. And so he's been practicing in Washington, D.C., and then he moved up to Philadelphia and has been practicing in New York City as well, but suffered a massive stroke 2 weeks ago. And he's hospitalized and partially responsive, partially paralyzed. And I would just love it if we would just create that resonant healing field among us and see if we can send some energy to George. I wonder, Fred, if you would like to just guide us through it, or set the stage, or set an intention, or something like that.
Well, I think it's, yeah, we can just all set our intentions for George. His name is George.
George Pearson.
George's highest good. I just picture in your mind, and just picture him surrounded in light, love, gratitude. And be present with George. Focusing on the brain. Just trusting, if your intention is for his highest good, whatever needs to be done to clear that will be done. We don't need to think about how it's going to be done. So it is.
And so it is.
Yes, George was in our group, went through training with us. I will tell Donna also to hold him. Very, very sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
6 o'clock there.
I'll check with Wes Tudor, another mind mirror practitioner who told us about George, and see if there's any sensation in the hospital room that occurred, and let you guys know by email. I wouldn't be surprised. I felt some really strong energies, oddly enough, in my legs, like ripples in my legs. Did anybody else feel anything they want to report?
I could feel the intensity of everybody together.
Me too.
There's a lot of energy.
We are a field, aren't we? Some would
Yes.
call us a field. We will call ourselves a loving, resonant field of energy, bringing healing wherever we go. Sounds like a vision statement, doesn't it? Whatever it is, thank you, Fred, for being with us. Beth, who did such a wonderful job of the timekeeping. All of you, and hope to meet you again. I would just announce that next month is going to be our Richard Schuster, the Hawaiian psychiatrist I've mentioned to you, who's been working with people who have creative blocks in whatever is their performing or whatever creative field, and taking them while hooked up to the mind mirror down into meditation to work with the blocks. And he's written a paper that's being considered by some journals, and he's going to show us those patterns and talk to us about it. It's kind of like lucid dreaming, but it has a different name, and Oksana gets that ready for you. You'll be able to see it up on the website pretty soon. So thank you for all being here. Thank you all for being here. And we'll see you the next time.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you for including me. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you and your presence and what you do in the world.